I'm Rachel Elizabeth Henry, 50 years old, and I built my career the long way, quiet competence, long nights, and decades of service that earned me a star on each shoulder. For years, I poured my time, my guidance, and frankly my belief into someone I thought was a friend. I helped shape his career from the ground up. And still, when the moment came, he tried to humiliate me in a room full of our peers. That was the moment everything shifted. Because the choice I made after that changed both of our lives. Have you ever given someone your support only to be dismissed the moment they felt powerful enough to do it? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up in a modest Air Force family on bases that smelled like jet fuel and fresh paint. My father worked maintenance on C-130s, coming home with grease under his fingernails and stories about hydraulic systems. My mother handled logistics at the Base Operations Center, coordinating supply chains with a kind of quiet efficiency that kept entire squadrons flying. Those hangars and administrative buildings shaped my childhood in ways I didn't fully appreciate until much later. I learned early that discipline wasn't about yelling, it was about showing up on time, following through, and taking responsibility when things went wrong. That's where I met Evan Brooks when I was 12. He was the new kid, transferred in from Kadena Air Base in Japan, looking lost outside the base library. His father was Navy, a logistics officer who moved every 2 years, and Evan had that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I noticed him struggling with an algebra textbook, the kind of frustration that makes kids either give up or lash out. I sat down across from him without asking and started explaining quadratic equations in a way that actually made sense. He looked at me like I'd just translated a foreign language. We became friends the way military kids do, fast and without ceremony. You learn not to waste time when you know someone might disappear in 6 months. I helped him study, introduced him to the other kids on base, made sure he knew which teachers to avoid and which ones actually cared. He was smart enough when he focused, but he struggled with consistency. I pushed him toward discipline, toward structure, toward the kind of work ethic that would carry him through whatever came next. By the time we were 16, Evan had decided he wanted to be a Navy SEAL. It wasn't a casual dream, it was the kind of obsession that consumes teenage boys looking for proof of their own worth. I supported him because that's what friends do. I helped him research the requirements, the training pipeline, the physical standards he'd need to meet. I woke up early to run with him before school, pushed him through pull-ups and flutter kicks when he wanted to quit, edited his application essays until they actually sounded like someone the Navy would want. When he needed money for a prep course in San Diego, I worked extra hours at the base commissary and loaned him $300 I'd saved for a car. He said he'd pay me back. I told him not to worry about it. I commissioned into the Air Force right out of college through ROTC. Started as a second lieutenant at 22, managing a flight of intelligence analysts at Langley Air Force Base. The work was methodical, collecting data, analyzing patterns, briefing senior officers on threat assessments that could shift entire operational plans. I liked the precision of it, the way good intelligence could save lives without anyone ever knowing your name. I earned my rank slowly, the way most officers do. 1 to 02 after 18 months. 2 to 03 after another 2 years. Captain at 26, running a larger team, deploying to Afghanistan to coordinate joint intelligence operations. Evan finished BUD/S training when I was a first lieutenant. He called me from Coronado, exhausted and triumphant, describing Hell Week like it was the greatest accomplishment in human history. Maybe for him it was. I was proud of him. I'd helped get him there, after all, not just with the running and the essays, but with the belief that he could do it when he wasn't sure himself. He thanked me exactly once, briefly, before launching into stories about his instructors and his boat crew and the guys who'd quit. We stayed in touch over the years, though the dynamic shifted in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. I kept climbing, deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, assignments at the Pentagon, a master's degree in strategic studies, command positions that came with more responsibility and less sleep. Major at 32. Lieutenant Colonel at 38. Every promotion earned through confidence, through late nights reviewing intelligence reports, through decisions that sometimes kept me awake wondering if I'd gotten it right. Evan took more from me than he returned, but I convinced myself that's just how some friendships work. When he needed advice on his evaluation reports, I walked him through the process. When he wanted an introduction to a joint task force commander I'd worked with, I made the call. When he was struggling with a leadership issue in his platoon, I spent 2 hours on the phone talking him through conflict resolution strategies they apparently hadn't covered in SEAL training. He rarely asked how I was doing. I told myself he was just busy, just focused on his career, just being Evan. When I pinned on Colonel at 43, he called it a desk promotion. We were at a restaurant near Norfolk, celebrating my new assignment to Air Combat Command Headquarters. He'd made Chief Petty Officer by then, E7, leading a SEAL platoon with the kind of confidence that came from years of direct action missions. He raised his beer and said, "Congratulations on the desk job, Ratch. Guess someone has to push papers while the rest of us do the real work." He was smiling when he said it. I laughed it off, told him someone had to keep him supplied and on target. But something in his tone bothered me, a dismissiveness I hadn't heard before, or maybe had been ignoring. When I made Brigadier General at 47, the youngest woman to pin on 07 in Air Force history that year, he was even less impressed. We were on a video call. He was deployed somewhere he couldn't specify, looking tan and exhausted. I told him about the promotion, tried to keep the pride out of my voice because I'd learned he didn't respond well to it. He said, "Finally got a real job, huh? About time they put you somewhere you can actually make decisions." Then he laughed, that familiar sound that used to mean we were in on the same joke. Except I wasn't laughing. A part of me still reached for his approval, even then. I hated that about myself. The imbalance had always been there. I just refused to see it clearly. I told myself he was joking, that military culture breeds that kind of ribbing, that he didn't really think my career was less legitimate than his. But late at night, after those conversations, I'd sit in my home office looking at my commission certificate and wonder why his opinion still mattered so much. Why I still needed him to acknowledge what I'd accomplished. Why friendship with Evan Brooks felt less like mutual respect and more like a debt I could never fully repay. I'd given him years of my time, my energy, my belief in his potential. I'd helped him become the SEAL he'd always wanted to be. And somewhere along the way, he decided that made me less than him. Not equal. Not even close. Just the person who'd been useful once, back before he became someone important. I didn't realize how deep that disrespect ran until it was too late to pretend otherwise. After Evan made Chief Petty Officer, the tone changed in ways that were harder to dismiss. He collected a circle of younger SEALs who treated him like a living legend, and he basked in it. The swagger was different now, less earned confidence, more performed dominance. When we'd meet up at joint training events or conferences, he'd have 3 or 4 of his guys with him, all of them young and loud and convinced they were the deadliest men in any room they entered. Evan encouraged it. He fed off their energy, their worship, their absolute certainty that being a SEAL made them superior to everyone else in uniform. He started introducing me by my first name to his guys. Just Rachel, with no rank, no context, no acknowledgement of the star on my shoulder. It was subtle enough that calling it out would have seemed petty, but deliberate enough that I knew exactly what he was doing. Making me smaller. Making me civilian in their eyes, or close enough. The first time it happened, at a reception in Tampa, one of his petty officers actually asked me what I did for the military. I said I was in the Air Force. He asked if I was a pilot. I said no, I was a general officer. The kid's face went red. Evan just smiled and changed the subject. Comments like, "Rail operators don't need stars to control a room," became common. He'd say it casually, during conversations about leadership or command authority, as if it were an objective observation rather than a pointed dismissal. His underlying message was clear: combat experience trumped everything else. Direct action was real leadership. Everything else, intelligence, strategy, logistics, the entire apparatus that made his missions possible, was bureaucratic theater performed by people who couldn't hack it in the field. His commanding officer was a captain, 06, Navy SEAL community to his core, who encouraged that kind of bravado. Commander Daniel Shaw treated the Navy SEAL teams like an elite priesthood and everyone else in the military like support staff. His evaluations praised aggressive leadership and warrior ethos in ways that translated to tolerating, even rewarding, casual disrespect toward anyone outside the community. Shaw had made his career on direct action missions and had no patience for what he called PowerPoint commanders. Evan absorbed that attitude completely. When Shaw spoke dismissively about Air Force officers at a joint planning conference, Evan laughed louder than anyone. Evan delayed salutes when he saw me on base. Not obviously, he'd eventually render them, but with just enough hesitation to make it clear he resented the requirement. He made small digs about Chair Force, officers who'd never seen real combat, conveniently forgetting that I'd spent 18 months in Afghanistan coordinating intelligence that kept his precious SEAL teams alive. He retold our history in a way that placed him above me, talking about how he'd made it through the toughest military training on Earth, while I'd gone the college route. As if my commissioning somehow negated every deployment, every command decision, every evaluation that had earned me the rank I wore. It wasn't one big issue. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, it was a slow tightening of a knot I kept pretending wasn't there. The jokes that went just a little too far. The introductions that omitted my rank. The way he'd talk over me in professional settings, especially when his guys were watching. The casual assumption that his experience was more valuable, more real, more worthy of respect than mine. I noticed. I logged every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment where he made it clear he didn't see me as his equal anymore. I'd go home after those interactions and replay them, analyzing them the way I'd analyze intelligence reports, looking for patterns and meanings. The pattern was obvious. Evan had decided that rank didn't matter if you hadn't earned it his way. That leadership didn't count if it happened from behind a desk. That my decades of service, my combat deployments, my command positions, none of it measured up to his definition of what made someone worthy of respect. But emotionally, I wasn't ready to admit how far he drifted from who he used to be. Or maybe how clearly he was showing me who he'd always been, underneath the grateful teenager I'd helped so many years ago. I made excuses. He was under stress from constant deployments. The SEAL community bred that kind of attitude. He didn't really mean it the way it sounded. I was being too sensitive. I was reading too much into casual military banter. The truth was simpler and harder. I didn't want to lose the friendship. Or what I'd convinced myself was friendship. I'd invested so much in Evan Brooks, time, money, emotional energy, belief, that admitting he didn't respect me felt like admitting I'd wasted decades on someone who'd never valued me at all. So I kept making excuses. Kept accepting behavior I'd never tolerate from anyone else. Kept hoping he'd remember who'd helped him get where he was and show some gratitude. I should have known better. I did know better. I just wasn't ready to act on that knowledge yet. At a joint reception in Virginia Beach, 6 months before everything fell apart, Evan introduced me to a young SEAL lieutenant as the girl who used to tutor me back on base. Not Brigadier General Henry. Not my old friend from when we were kids. Just the girl. Like I was still 12 years old, still defined entirely by my usefulness to him, still locked in a dynamic where he was the one who'd gone on to do important things. The lieutenant looked confused, glanced at my star, and said, "Ma'am, it's an honor." Evan laughed and said, "She's cool, don't worry about all that rank stuff." As if my position was a costume I was wearing rather than something I'd earned through 25 years of service. I excused myself and walked out to the parking lot. Stood there in the humid evening air, watching F divided by a -18s take off from Oceana, and finally admitted what I'd been avoiding. Evan Brooks didn't respect me. He never had, not really. He'd appreciated my usefulness. He'd taken what I offered. But respect, the kind that acknowledges someone's accomplishments, that treats them as an equal, that shows basic professional courtesy, that had never been part of our equation. The imbalance wasn't new. It had always been there. I just refused to see it because seeing it meant facing what I'd already lost. The joint briefing was scheduled for 1300 hours at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek, Building 16, Conference Room B. It was a planning session for a major international exercise involving NATO forces, multiple U.S. service branches, and allied partners from 6 countries. The kind of coordination that took months to organize and could set the tone for operational cooperation for years to come. I'd been assigned as the senior Air Force representative, responsible for air component coordination and intelligence integration. 36 officers from various commands would attend, along with senior enlisted advisors and support staff. I arrived at 12:45, early as always, wearing standard operational camouflage pattern utilities with no rank insignia visible. I'd left my star in my office, along with my name tape. It was a calculated decision. I wanted to observe the room dynamics before the formalities started, get a sense of who was actually prepared and who was coasting on reputation. Sometimes you learn more when people don't know they're talking to a general officer. The conference room was large, set up with stadium-style seating and multiple projection screens. Equipment specialists were running final checks on the classified network connections. I took a seat in the back, reviewed my notes, and waited. Officers filtered in gradually: Army majors and colonels, Navy commanders, a Marine lieutenant colonel I'd worked with in Afghanistan. Professional nods, quiet conversations, the usual pre-briefing energy. Evan walked in at 12:58 with 8 members of his SEAL platoon. You could hear them coming down the hallway, loud voices, laughter, the particular swagger that comes from believing you're the most dangerous people in any building. They moved like a pack, tight formation, all of them wearing their tridents prominently. Evan was in the center, holding court, telling some story that had his guys laughing. Chief Petty Officer Evan Brooks, E7, completely in his element. They grabbed seats in the middle section, still loud, still treating the briefing room like their personal locker room. A Navy commander, Lieutenant Commander Sarachin, someone I'd worked with before, glanced their way with obvious irritation, but said nothing. That was the problem with the SEAL community's reputation. They got away with behavior that would earn anyone else a sharp correction because people were afraid of being seen as hostile to the warriors. Evan spotted me in the back row. His eyes swept over me once, dismissive, then returned. I watched recognition flicker across his face, not of who I was, but of what I appeared to be. A woman, middle-aged, sitting alone, no visible rank. He smiled, the way predators smile when they spot easy prey. He stood up and walked toward me, his guys watching, already grinning like they knew what was coming. The room was starting to quiet down as people noticed the interaction. Evan stopped right in front of me, hands on his hips, that familiar smirk I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Hey," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "What's your rank again?" "Office Lady First Class." His platoon erupted. Laughter rippled through the SEALs, loud and performative. A few other officers looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Evan was playing to his audience now, feeding off their energy, riding the moment. I looked at him and said nothing. Just maintained eye contact. He stepped closer, emboldened by the laughter. "Come on, boys. Look at this. Another useless woman they stuck here to pour coffee." He glanced back at his guys, making sure they were watching. "What do you think? Is she lost? Maybe looking for the admin building." More laughter. One of his petty officers actually slapped his knee. The Marine lieutenant colonel looked like she wanted to intervene, but was calculating the political cost. The Navy commander had gone very still, her face carefully blank. I checked my watch. 12:59 and 30 seconds. "You have 30 seconds, I said. My voice was quiet but clear. Evan leaned in, his face inches from mine. Or what? He was grinning now, fully committed to the performance. "You gonna report me to your supervisor?" "Tell them the mean SEAL hurt your feelings." I didn't respond. Just kept my eyes on his, counting down silently. The doors at the front of the conference room opened at exactly 1300 hours. 5 general officers entered in formation, moving with the kind of precision that comes from decades of military bearing. General Marcus Denton, Air Force 09, 4 stars. Lieutenant General Sophia Reyes, Army 09, 3 stars. Major General Ethan Caldwell, Marine Corps 08, 2 stars. Brigadier General Nadia Laurent, NATO Liaison, 7 equivalent, 1 star. Rear Admiral Thomas Keane, Navy 08, 2 stars. They walked past every officer in that room without breaking stride. They looked past the Army colonels in the front row. They looked past the Navy commanders and the Marine lieutenant colonel. They looked past Evan Brooks and his entire SEAL platoon. They walked straight to the back of the room, stopped in front of me, and came to attention. All 5 of them raised their hands in a crisp, simultaneous salute. "Good afternoon, General Henry," General Denton said. I stood, returned the salute with the precision I'd practiced for 25 years, and said, "Good afternoon, General Denton." "Gentlemen." "Ma'am." The silence afterward was absolute. You could have heard a pen drop. Every eye in the room was on me, on us, watching the senior officers in the entire exercise render military courtesy to the woman Evan Brooks had just called useless. I looked at Evan, watched his face strain of color, watched his eyes go wide as reality crashed into his assumptions like a freight train, watched him understand, finally, that I wasn't the kid who used to tutor him on Air Force bases. I wasn't his friend. I wasn't even his equal. I was Brigadier General Rachel Elizabeth Henry, 07, United States Air Force, and I outranked every single person in that room except the 4-star standing next to me. Evan tried to step back, almost stumbled. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His seals had gone rigid, their faces frozen between horror and disbelief. One of them, the kid who'd slapped his knee, looked like he might actually be sick. "Thank you, General," I said to Denton. "Shall we begin the briefing?" "At your discretion, General Henry," he replied. "You have the floor." I walked to the front of the room. Every step was measured, deliberate. I could feel Evan's eyes on my back, feel the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present. When I reached the podium, I turned to face the room. "Good afternoon," I said. "For those who don't know me, I'm Brigadier General Rachel Henry, Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. I'll be coordinating the air component and intelligence integration for this exercise. Let's begin." The briefing lasted 90 minutes. I presented air support coordination, deconfliction procedures, and intelligence sharing protocols with the same professional competence I'd demonstrated for 25 years. General Denton added strategic guidance. Lieutenant General Reyes covered ground force integration. The other general officers contributed their components. It was a textbook joint operational planning session, thorough, efficient, exactly what was needed. Evan said nothing the entire time. He sat in his seat, rigid, his face carefully blank. His seals had gone quiet, their earlier swagger completely evaporated. Nobody was laughing anymore. After the briefing concluded, officers approached me with questions about coordination timelines and communication procedures. I answered each professionally, keeping my focus on the mission requirements. An Army colonel who'd witnessed the opening incident made a point of thanking me for the comprehensive briefing. The Marine lieutenant colonel gave me a respectful nod that acknowledged everything without saying a word. Lieutenant Commander Chin waited until others had cleared out, then approached quietly. "General Henry, I want to apologize on behalf of..." I held up my hand. "No apology necessary, Commander. You weren't responsible for his behavior." "Still, ma'am, that was completely unacceptable." Yes, I agreed. It was. When I finally left the conference room, Evan was gone. His platoon had disappeared the moment we were dismissed, probably retreating to their team room to process what had just happened. I'd seen their faces during the briefing: embarrassment, shock, the dawning realization that their chief had just humiliated himself and them in front of the senior leadership of an international military exercise. I returned to my office at Langley Air Force Base, 2 hours north. My deputy was waiting with message traffic that required immediate attention, updates from our intelligence fusion cell, coordination requests from combatant commands, the usual flow of operational requirements. I worked through them methodically, focusing on the mission, pushing aside everything else. At 1700 hours, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, then recognized the area code. San Diego, Navy SEAL Home Base. It was from Senior Chief David Martinez, chief of the boat for Evan SEAL Team. The message was formal, almost certainly dictated by their commanding officer, "Ma'am, Senior Chief Martinez, SEAL Team 8. On behalf of our command, I want to extend a formal apology for Chief Brooks' conduct at today's briefing. His behavior was unprofessional and does not reflect the standards of our team. We are addressing this matter internally." I read it twice, then set the phone down without responding. An apology was required by military protocol, but it didn't change anything. The damage was done not to me, but to Evan. He'd revealed himself in front of officers who would remember this incident for years. In the military, reputation is currency, and he'd just bankrupted his. That night, I sat in my home office with a glass of wine I didn't drink, looking at photos from our childhood. There was one from when we were 15, both of us in PT gear after a morning run, grinning at the camera like we'd just conquered the world. I remembered that day I'd pushed him through his first 10-mile run, preparing him for the SEAL fitness standards. He'd said I was the best friend he'd ever had. I'd believed him. I thought about all the years I'd spent helping him. The tutoring sessions, the fitness training, the application essays I'd edited, the $300 I'd never asked him to repay, the phone calls when he needed advice, the introductions I'd made, the support I'd offered freely, repeatedly, without expecting anything except basic respect in return. A fellow general, Olivia Grant, called at 2200 hours. She'd heard about the incident through the military's incredibly efficient informal network. "Ratch, I heard what happened at Little Creek. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. That must have been satisfying. I considered that. No, not really. Not even a little? It shouldn't have been necessary. That was the truth. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Olivia was quiet for a moment. "You know what my father used to say? Rank doesn't change character. It reveals it." That landed hard. Your father was right. For what it's worth, every senior officer in that room respected how you handled it. Professional, calm, no grandstanding. That matters. Thank you. After we hung up, I sat with that phrase. Rank doesn't change character. It reveals it. Evan hadn't become disrespectful when he made Chief Petty Officer. He'd always been that way underneath. He'd just hidden it as long as he needed something from me. The moment he'd achieved the status he wanted, the moment he'd built his own reputation and gathered his own followers, he'd stopped bothering to hide his real opinion of me. He'd liked the version of me who stayed beneath him, who helped him without asking for anything back, who accepted his casual dismissiveness as just the way Evan was. The moment reality contradicted his narrative, the moment I existed in a professional context where my rank and authority were undeniable, he'd lashed out. Because my success threatened the story he'd told himself about our relationship. The truth was simple and brutal. He didn't respect me because he'd never respected me. Not when we were 12. Not when we were 16. Not when I helped him prepare for BUD/S. Not when I celebrated his achievements. Never. He tolerated me as long as I was useful, then dismissed me when he no longer needed my help. It hurt. Quietly, deeply, in a way that wouldn't show on any evaluation or fitness report. But it also clarified everything. I'd spent decades wondering why I couldn't quite reach his approval, why friendship with Evan always felt slightly off balance, why I constantly felt like I was proving myself to someone who never quite acknowledged what I'd accomplished. Now I knew. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. I submitted a memorandum for record at 0800 hours the following morning. It was required by protocol. Any incident involving disrespect toward a general officer during an official military function needed to be documented. I kept it factual, unemotional, professionally neutral. Date, time, location, witnesses present. Direct quotes when possible. No interpretation, no emotional language, just the observable events exactly as they'd occurred. I sent it to my chain of command, copied the Joint Exercise Coordination staff, and included it in the exercise after-action documentation. My job was to report what happened. What came next was up to the Navy. Evan's chain of command acted faster than I expected. Within 4 hours, I received a courtesy notification from Captain Daniel Shaw, the SEAL team commanding officer who'd previously encouraged Evan's swagger. The message was terse, formal, noticeably lacking his usual casual tone. General Henry, be advised that CPO Brooks has received formal counseling regarding his conduct at the joint briefing. Additional administrative actions are under review. This matter is being taken seriously by Naval Special Warfare Command. Translation: they were protecting their reputation. The Navy SEAL community depended on maintaining good relationships with joint commands, and having one of their chiefs publicly humiliate a general officer threatened those relationships. This wasn't about right and wrong. This was about damage control. My phone started buzzing at 1000 hours. Text messages, all from Evan, all marked urgent. I let them pile up, unread, while I focused on actual work, intelligence assessments that required my immediate attention, coordination with the National Security Agency, briefing preparation for the Vice Chief of Staff. At 1200 hours, I finally opened the messages. They came in waves, tracking his emotional progression. 11:05, we need to talk. 11:15, you didn't have to do that. 11:32, you embarrass me in front of my entire team. 11:48, I was joking. You know I was joking. 12:02, how could you not warn me? You just let me walk into that. 12:14, this is going to destroy my career. 12:23, Rachel, please. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I read through all of them without responding. The progression was classic: anger first, then denial, then self-pity, finally guilt. But notably absent, any acknowledgement that his behavior had been wrong. It was all about what I'd done to him, how I'd failed to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. At 1400 hours, a Navy commander I didn't know called my office. My deputy took the message, Commander James Walcott, SEAL Liaison Officer, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident at Little Creek and explore options for resolution. I declined through my deputy. There was nothing to discuss. Evan had acted inappropriately. I'd documented it. His command was handling it. The matter was closed. What they really wanted was for me to make it go away. To show understanding for a fellow warrior. To demonstrate flexibility and team mentality. To prioritize unit cohesion over holding someone accountable. I'd seen this pattern before, the quiet pressure to not make waves, to accept disrespect gracefully, to be the bigger person by letting things slide. I refused to participate. Not out of vindictiveness, but out of principle. If Evan had disrespected a male general officer the way he disrespected me, his career would have been over immediately. The double standard that expected women to absorb disrespect without complaint while demanding men be treated with automatic deference was exactly what I'd fought against my entire career. At 1600 hours, Commander Walcott tried again, this time with a different approach. His message, delivered through official channels, General Henry, Captain Shaw would like to personally assure you that CPO Brooks is receiving appropriate corrective action. In the interest of maintaining positive joint operational relationships, we hope this matter can be resolved without further escalation. We value our partnership with the Air Force and want to ensure one incident doesn't undermine years of productive cooperation. There it was. The subtle threat. Play along or risk damaging inter-service relationships. Accept the apology and move on, or be seen as the problem. I responded through official channels, keeping my reply brief and professional. Commander Walcott, I appreciate Captain Shaw's attention to this matter. The incident has been properly documented per Air Force protocol. I have no further action planned and consider the matter closed from my perspective. The appropriate corrective measures are at the discretion of CPO Brooks' chain of command. Respectfully, B.G. Henry. Translation: I'd done my job. Now they needed to do theirs. I wasn't going to help them minimize this or make it easier for Evan to escape accountability. That evening, Lieutenant General Olivia Grant called again. I heard the Navy's trying to smooth things over. They are. You holding firm? Yes. Good. Don't let them pressure you into making this disappear. What he did was inexcusable, and every junior officer who witnessed it needs to see that there are actual consequences. That's what I keep telling myself. You sound uncertain. I was quiet for a moment. Part of me wonders if I'm being vindictive. If I should just let it go. Rachel. Olivia's voice was sharp. If a male SEAL chief had said that to a male Air Force general, what would have happened? His career would be over. Exactly. This isn't vindictive. It's equal standards. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're the bare minimum of professional conduct. She was right. I knew she was right. But decades of conditioning of being told to be understanding, to not make waves, to prove I wasn't a difficult woman, made it hard to trust my own judgment. He was my friend, I said quietly. No, Olivia replied. He was someone you helped who never respected you. There's a difference. After we hung up, I sat with that distinction. A friend would have celebrated my promotions. A friend would have introduced me properly to his subordinates. A friend would have shown basic respect, especially in professional settings. Evan had done none of those things. He'd taken my help, used my connections, and dismissed my achievements. That wasn't friendship. It was exploitation wearing friendship's mask. For once, I wouldn't protect him from himself. I wouldn't make excuses. I wouldn't smooth things over or make his life easier. I'd simply stop shielding him from the consequences of choices he'd made freely and repeatedly. If that destroyed our relationship, maybe the relationship had never really existed in the first place. The Navy removed Evan from the international exercise assignment within 48 hours. The official notification came through Joint Coordination Channels, a bland, bureaucratic message stating that Chief Petty Officer Brooks had been reassigned to other duties and would be replaced by Senior Chief Martinez for the exercise leadership role. No explanation provided, but everyone who'd been in that conference room knew exactly why. It was a significant professional blow. The exercise would have been a high-visibility assignment, the kind that gets mentioned in evaluation reports and promotion packages. The kind that establishes credibility with allied military forces and builds relationships that matter for future career opportunities. Evan had just lost all of that because he couldn't resist performing for his guys at my expense. According to my sources in the Navy, and general officers always have sources, his commanding officer had placed him on watch status for the next evaluation cycle. Not quite formal administrative action, but a clear signal that his judgment was being questioned. Captain Shaw, apparently, had been furious. Not because Evan had disrespected a woman or embarrassed himself, but because he damaged the SEAL team's relationship with joint commands. The pragmatic calculation was obvious. One chief wasn't worth undermining cooperation with multiple general officers. Evan's younger SEALs stopped orbiting him quite so closely. I heard through unofficial channels that several of them had been quietly counseled by their leadership about professional conduct and joint force respect. The petty officer who'd slapped his knee during Evan's performance reportedly wrote me a formal apology letter, though I never received it, probably intercepted by his chain of command as inappropriate contact. The message got through anyway. The guys who'd laughed loudest were now scrambling to distance themselves from the incident. Senior leaders across the joint force praised how I'd handled the situation. General Denton stopped by my office personally 2 weeks later. That could have gone a lot of different ways, he said. You kept it professional. No grandstanding, no drama, just calm competence. That matters. Thank you, sir. Between us. He lowered his voice. I'm tired of watching good officers tolerate disrespect because they're afraid of being labeled difficult. You set a clear boundary, documented the facts, and moved on. That's leadership. After he left, I sat at my desk thinking about boundaries. For years, I'd absorbed Evan's casual dismissiveness, his jokes at my expense, his failure to acknowledge my achievements. I'd told myself I was being mature, being understanding, being a good friend. But really, I'd been teaching him that my boundaries didn't matter. That he could treat me however he wanted without consequence. That respect was optional when it came to me. From a distance, I watched Evan confront reality. It happened gradually, in small, observable ways. The confidence drained from his posture. He stopped holding court in the SEAL team common areas. His social media went quiet, no more photos of training exercises, no more quotes about warrior mentality, no more performance of operator culture. Some days, according to colleagues who crossed paths with him, he looked angry, jaw clenched, eyes hard, radiating resentment. Other days, he just looked hollow, like someone who'd finally seen his own reflection clearly and didn't like what he found. His promotion pathway had narrowed significantly. Making Senior Chief Petty Officer, E8, now seemed unlikely. The watch status would follow him through at least one more evaluation cycle, probably two. Even if he recovered professionally, this incident would be part of his permanent record. Officers who'd witnessed it would remember. Every time his name came up for a high-visibility assignment or a prestigious school slot, someone would recall the day he'd humiliated himself at Little Creek. I felt no satisfaction watching his downfall. That surprised me. I'd imagined, in my angrier moments over the years, that seeing him face consequences would feel like vindication. Instead, it just felt sad. Sad that someone I'd invested so much in had turned out to be so small. Sad that he'd needed to diminish me to feel important. Sad that he'd thrown away a friendship, or what I'd thought was friendship, for the cheap approval of subordinates who'd abandoned him the moment his status was threatened. Meanwhile, I kept working. Quietly, effectively, the way I'd always worked. I coordinated intelligence integration for the international exercise. I briefed senior Defense Department officials on emerging threats. I mentored junior officers, especially women, who were navigating the same military culture that had tried to convince me to make Evan's behavior disappear. I led with competence and consistency, building the kind of reputation that's earned through decades of showing up and doing the job right. Other general officers sought my perspective on joint operations. Allied military representatives specifically requested me for coordination meetings. My name appeared in discussions about future senior leadership positions. None of that happened because of the incident at Little Creek. It happened despite it because I'd spent 25 years building credibility that couldn't be undermined by one chief petty officer's insecurity. 3 months after the briefing, I ran into Senior Chief Martinez at a joint training conference in Norfolk. He approached carefully, respectfully, clearly uncertain how I'd receive him. "General Henry, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Senior Chief." "Ma'am, I wanted you to know what Chief Brooks did was completely out of line. The whole team knows it. We've had some hard conversations about respect and professionalism since then." "I appreciate that." He hesitated. "He's struggling, ma'am. He won't admit it, but he is." I nodded slowly. "That's not your burden to carry, Senior Chief. And it's not mine either." "Yes, ma'am." He paused. "For what it's worth, you handled that situation with more grace than he deserved." After he left, I realized something important. Evan's struggle wasn't my responsibility. Not anymore. I'd spent decades trying to help him, support him, believe in him. I'd made his problems my problems, his failures my failures, his insecurities my burden to manage. And in return, he dismissed me, diminished me, and publicly humiliated me the moment he thought he could do so without consequence. His downfall wasn't because of me. It wasn't because I documented his behavior or refused to make it disappear. It was because his world had finally stopped excusing him. Because the military culture that had tolerated casual disrespect toward women officers was slowly, grudgingly, beginning to demand better. Because enough senior leaders had witnessed what he'd done and decided it was unacceptable. I didn't destroy Evan Brooks. He destroyed himself, one disrespectful comment at a time, building toward a moment where his character would be revealed in front of people who mattered. I'd just been unfortunate enough to be his chosen target when that moment arrived. The truth was simpler than revenge or justice or vindication. Some people show you who they are slowly, over years, through small actions you explain away. Others show you in one moment, so clearly that denial becomes impossible. Evan had done both. And finally, I'd stopped making excuses for him. 6 months after the incident, Evan requested a meeting through official channels. Not a text message. Not a casual phone call. A formal request submitted through my executive officer with proper protocol and military courtesy. That alone told me something had shifted. My executive officer, Major Sarah Chin, brought me the request. "Ma'am, Chief Petty Officer Brooks is requesting a 15-minute meeting to deliver a personal statement. He's asking for your schedule availability over the next 2 weeks." I looked at the request form. It was precisely formatted, properly submitted, showing none of the casual presumption that had characterized our relationship before. "What's your read on this?" "Hard to say, ma'am. Could be a genuine apology. Could be an attempt to get you to advocate for him with his chain of command. Could be something else entirely." I considered for a long moment. Part of me wanted to decline immediately. The relationship was over. There was nothing left to salvage. But another part, the part that had known him since we were 12, was curious. Had he actually learned anything? Had hitting rock bottom forced real self-examination? Or was this just another manipulation? "Tell him I'll grant him 10 minutes. Next Thursday, 1600 hours, in my office. Make it clear this is a courtesy, not a negotiation." Thursday arrived. I cleared my schedule for the meeting more out of caution than expectation. At 15:55, Major Chin knocked on my door. "Ma'am, Chief Brooks is here." "Send him in." Evan entered my office in his dress blues, perfectly pressed, ribbon rack properly aligned. He came to attention and saluted with precision I'd never seen from him before. "Good afternoon, General Henry. Thank you for agreeing to see me." I returned the salute. "Take a seat, Chief." He sat ramrod straight, hands on his knees. The swagger was completely gone. He looked older, not physically, but in his eyes. Like someone who'd finally been forced to see past his own narrative. Ma'am, I'm not here to make excuses or ask for anything. I'm here to apologize, really apologize, for my conduct at the Little Creek briefing and for years of disrespectful behavior before that. His voice was steady but quiet. What I said to you that day was inexcusable. How I've treated you for years was inexcusable. You helped me become a SEAL, and I repaid that by dismissing everything you accomplished. I was wrong. Completely, unambiguously wrong. I listened without responding. I've spent the last 6 months in counseling, not required, voluntary, trying to understand why I acted that way. Why I needed to diminish you to feel important. Why your success threatened me. He paused. My counselor helped me see that I never respected your achievements because they reminded me that I needed help. That I wasn't self-made. That someone else, a woman, had been essential to my success. And I couldn't handle that. That landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I'd suspected something similar, but hearing him articulate it was different. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I don't expect us to be friends again. I'm just here to tell you the truth. You deserved better. You always deserved better. And I'm sorry I couldn't see that until I'd already destroyed our friendship. The office was quiet except for the sound of air conditioning. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. I saw only exhaustion and something that looked like genuine remorse. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally. Sincerely. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. Thank you, ma'am. But you're right. We're not going to be friends again. Trust, once broken the way you broke it, doesn't come back. Not really. I understand. The person I thought I was friends with for 30 years didn't actually exist. The real you, the one who showed up at that briefing, that's who you'd been all along. I just refused to see it. I kept my voice even, factual. I'm glad you're getting help. I hope you become someone better. But that growth can't include me. He nodded slowly. That's fair. Is there anything else? No, ma'am. He stood, came to attention, saluted again. Thank you for your time, General. I returned the salute. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Major Chin came in 5 minutes later. How'd it go? Better than expected. Worse than it should have been necessary. I looked at the closed door. He apologized. Seemed genuine. Doesn't matter. You're not giving him another chance? No. I was certain about that. Some things, once broken, stay broken. That's not cruelty. That's just reality. Over the following months, I heard occasional updates through military channels. Evan's performance had stabilized. He was doing his job competently, if quietly. The watch status eventually lifted. He'd never regain his previous trajectory, but he might salvage a respectable career if he stayed focused and avoided further mistakes. We served in the same military, but no longer in each other's lives. I'd see his name occasionally in personnel rosters or operational reports. Each time, I felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Just the neutral acknowledgement that someone I used to know was still out there, doing their job, living their life separate from mine. That was the right ending. Not dramatic, not satisfying in any cinematic way. Just the quiet termination of a relationship that had been unbalanced from the start. I'd finally stopped carrying the weight of someone else's insecurity. Stopped making excuses for behavior I'd never tolerate from anyone else. Stopped believing that loyalty meant accepting disrespect. The friendship was over. The obligation was over. The hope that he'd somehow become who I'd wanted him to be, that was over too. And I was fine with all of it. 3 years passed. My responsibilities expanded, more oversight authority, more strategic planning, more direct advising to combatant commanders and Defense Department leadership. I made Major General at 50, 2nd star, becoming one of the senior-most women in Air Force intelligence. The promotion board specifically cited my exceptional ability to maintain professionalism under challenging circumstances and build effective joint operational relationships. I knew what that meant. The Little Creek incident had become part of my professional narrative, not as a scandal, but as evidence of leadership under pressure. I built a legacy the only way that matters, through consistency. Through showing up every day and doing the job right. Through mentoring junior officers who needed someone to show them that competence and integrity could coexist with ambition. through making decisions that prioritized mission effectiveness over personal comfort or political calculation. Young women officers sought me out at conferences and professional development events. They asked how I'd handled disrespect from male peers, how I'd navigated joint operations when some officers didn't take me seriously, how I'd built credibility in communities that didn't automatically respect women in leadership. I told them the truth. You earn respect through competence, maintain it through consistency, and protect it by refusing to tolerate behavior that undermines your authority. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be professional and refuse to accept anything less from others. Evan remained in the Navy. He made Senior Chief Petty Officer, eventually E8, but the promotion came years later than it should have. He never regained the shine he'd had before Little Creek. His career stabilized at competent mediocrity. He did his job, led his teams adequately, and slowly faded from the high-visibility operator culture he'd once embodied. According to colleagues who'd served with him, he was humbler now, more measured, noticeably careful about how he spoke to and about officers regardless of gender or branch. I felt no bitterness when I heard those updates. Just quiet acknowledgement that sometimes people learn, and sometimes the cost of that education is everything they thought they wanted. Our paths crossed indirectly through personnel rosters and operational reports. I'd see his name, note his current assignment, and move on without emotional reaction. He was another name on a list of thousands, another service member doing their job somewhere in the vast military apparatus. The connection we'd once had, the mentorship, the friendship I'd imagined, the investment I'd made, all of it had dissolved into professional indifference. That was the cleanest form of resolution. Not dramatic confrontation. Not tearful reconciliation. Just two people who'd once mattered to each other now existing in separate orbits, their trajectories no longer intersecting in any meaningful way. A journalist interviewed me for a profile piece about senior military women breaking barriers. She asked about challenges I'd faced. I kept my answer general, professional, focused on systemic issues rather than specific incidents. But I did say this. People show you who they are when they think no one important is watching. The real test of character isn't how you treat people who can help your career. It's how you treat people when you think their status doesn't matter. The quote got picked up, shared across military social media, printed in professional journals. I received messages from officers, men and women both, saying it resonated with their experiences, that it captured something essential about leadership and respect. I never mentioned Evan by name. He knew it was about him. Anyone who'd been at Little Creek knew. But the point wasn't to shame him further. The point was to articulate a principle that mattered more than any individual story. Respect must be mutual or it's worthless. 5 years after the incident, I received an invitation to speak at the Naval Special Warfare Leadership Symposium in Coronado. The invitation surprised me, not because I wasn't qualified, but because it required someone in the SEAL community to specifically request an Air Force general who'd once been publicly disrespected by one of their chiefs. I accepted. The speaking engagement went well. I discussed intelligence integration in special operations, emphasizing the critical relationship between tactical operators and strategic planning. The SEAL officers present were professional, engaged, respectful. Several thanked me afterward for my insights. As I was leaving, a Navy captain I didn't recognize approached. General Henry, I'm Captain Michael Rhodes. I took over command of SEAL Team 8 2 years ago. Evan's team. Captain Rhodes. I wanted you to know, we use the incident with former Chief Brooks as a case study in our leadership courses now. Not to embarrass him, but to illustrate the importance of mutual respect in joint operations and the consequences of letting ego override professionalism. That caught me off guard. I see. The younger guys need to understand that swagger without respect is just arrogance. That the SEAL Trident doesn't exempt them from basic military courtesy. That every service member, regardless of branch or position, deserves professional treatment. He paused. You handled that situation with remarkable restraint. It's become a teaching moment for us. After he left, I stood in the California sunshine thinking about legacy. Not the dramatic moments that feel important at the time, but the quiet accumulation of choices that define who you are. Evan's legacy would include the day he humiliated himself trying to humiliate me. Mine would include the day I maintained professional composure when someone tried to make me smaller to elevate himself. Sometimes the cleanest justice is a room going silent when the truth walks in. Not because anyone planned it. Not because someone orchestrated perfect revenge. Simply because reality contradicted someone's carefully constructed narrative, and there was nowhere left to hide. I'd spent 30 years helping Evan Brooks believe in himself. He'd spent those same 30 years taking what I offered while quietly resenting that he needed it. The moment our paths crossed in a context where my authority was undeniable, he lashed out, tried to reestablish the hierarchy he needed, where he was superior and I was subordinate. And reality, in the form of 5 general officers who knew exactly who I was, had corrected his delusion immediately and permanently. I'd learned something important from all of it. You can't make someone respect you. You can only refuse to tolerate disrespect. You can only maintain your own standards and let the consequences teach their own lessons. You can only build your character through consistent choices and trust that eventually, your reputation reflects your reality. Evan Brooks had shown me who he was. I'd finally believed him. And I'd walked away. That was enough. The justice I'd needed wasn't revenge or vindication or even his apology. It was the freedom to stop carrying someone else's insecurity as my burden. The clarity to see that loyalty to someone who doesn't respect you isn't loyalty, it's self-betrayal. The peace that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by whether others acknowledge it. 3 decades of friendship ended in 30 seconds of silence. And in that silence, I'd finally heard what I needed to hear. Nothing. No more excuses. No more explanations. No more hoping he'd somehow become someone he'd never been. Just the quiet certainty that I deserved better, had always deserved better, and would never again settle for less. Character reveals itself in moments when people think the truth doesn't matter. Evan thought he was safe performing for his guys, mocking someone he decided was beneath him, secure in his status and his community's protection. He was wrong. And the wrongness of that assumption had cost him everything he thought made him important. I moved forward, built my career, mentored others, served with distinction, earned 2 stars, then consideration for 3. And through it all, I carried no bitterness, just the learned wisdom that some relationships end not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet recognition that they'd never really existed in the first place. Respect must be mutual or it's worthless. Trust once betrayed rarely returns. And sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. That's the truth I learned from Evan Brooks. And it was worth everything it cost to finally understand. 15 years later, I stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, surrounded by portraits of Medal of Honor recipients and the weight of military history. Lieutenant General Rachel Elizabeth Henry, 09, 3 stars, United States Air Force. Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The promotion ceremony had concluded an hour ago, and I was supposed to be at the reception, but I'd slipped away for a moment of quiet reflection. 3 stars. I looked at my shoulder, at the insignia that represented 37 years of service, and tried to process what it meant. Fewer than 200 people in the entire U.S. military wore 3 stars at any given time. I was one of 11 women currently at this rank across all services. The journey from that second lieutenant at Langley Air Force Base to this moment had been long, demanding, and occasionally brutal. But I'd made it on my terms with my integrity intact. My phone buzzed. A text from my executive officer. "Ma'am, the Secretary of Defense is asking for you." I smiled slightly. Even at 3 stars, duty called. The reception was in the Pentagon's executive dining room, filled with senior military leadership, defense officials, intelligence community directors, and allied military representatives. General Marcus Denton, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, raised his glass as I entered. There she is. The woman who proved that quiet competence beats loud swagger every single time. People laughed, applauded. I accepted the attention gracefully, made the required remarks about teamwork and service, and spent the next hour in conversations about emerging threats, intelligence integration, and strategic competition with near-peer adversaries. This was my world now, the highest levels of defense planning, where decisions affected global operations and national security. Admiral James Corrigan, Chief of Naval Operations, approached with someone I didn't immediately recognize. "General Henry, I wanted to introduce you to someone." This is Command Master Chief Petty Officer Richard Torres, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. The MCPUN. The highest-ranking enlisted member of the entire Navy, E9, advisor to the Secretary of the Navy and the CNO. We shook hands professionally. General Henry, it's an honor, Torres said. I've followed your career. You've been a model of professional excellence. Thank you, Master Chief. That means a great deal coming from you. Admiral Corrigan glanced around, then lowered his voice slightly. Richard wanted to talk to you about something. There's a former SEAL, Senior Chief Petty Officer Evan Brooks. He's 23 years in, facing mandatory retirement at 30. He's requested consideration for a waiver to extend his service and attempt to make Master Chief before he ages out. I kept my face neutral. I see. Torres continued. His record over the past 15 years has been solid. Not spectacular, but consistent. He's led training programs, mentored junior SEALs, and by all accounts learned from his mistakes. But his package needs senior officer endorsements for the waiver to be considered. Several people have written letters. He's asked if you would consider doing the same. There it was. After 15 years of silence, Evan Brooks was asking me for help. Again. Why would he think I'd support that request? I asked quietly. Admiral Corrigan was direct. Because you're known for being fair. For judging people on their full record, not just their worst moments. And because, frankly, your endorsement would carry more weight than almost anyone else's. A 3-star general he once disrespected vouching for his character rehabilitation? That would be significant. I was quiet for a long moment, processing. Around us, the reception continued, conversations about budgets and operations, laughter, the constant hum of military leadership conducting the informal business that matters as much as the formal kind. Has he been a good SEAL for the past 15 years? I asked. Yes, Torres said without hesitation. Not a rock star, but solid. He's done the work, taken the hard assignments, built a reputation for reliability rather than flash. The young guys respect him now because he actually mentors them instead of using them for validation. And the waiver request? What's motivating it? Honestly, I think he wants to retire as a Master Chief. To prove he became something despite derailing his career early on. To leave the service as someone who recovered rather than someone who just survived. I looked at both of them. You're asking me to help him achieve a redemption narrative. Admiral Corrigan met my eyes. I'm asking you to consider whether his last 15 years of service deserve recognition, separate from what happened before. But I understand if the answer is no. No one would blame you. Can I think about it? Of course, ma'am. Take whatever time you need. After they moved on, I found myself standing alone near the windows overlooking the Potomac River, thinking about Evan Brooks. I hadn't really thought about him in years. He'd become a footnote in my story, a cautionary tale I occasionally referenced in leadership discussions without naming names. The emotional charge had faded long ago, replaced by indifferent acknowledgement that we'd once known each other and no longer did. But this was different. This was a direct request for my support, my endorsement, my help. After everything, he was asking me to vouch for him. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. Why should I help him achieve his goals when he'd spent years dismissing mine? Why should I invest any energy in his redemption when he'd shown me so little respect? The anger was still there, buried deep but accessible if I wanted to reach for it. But another part, the part that had spent 15 years becoming someone defined by more than that one incident, wondered if refusing would make me more like him than like the leader I'd tried to become. That night, I sat in my Arlington apartment reviewing Evan's service record. I'd requested it through official channels, citing professional curiosity about a potential endorsement request. His trajectory was exactly as Torres had described, solid, consistent, unremarkable. After the Little Creek incident, his evaluations showed a marked change in tone. Less swagger, more substance. Comments from his superiors praised his mentorship, his reliability, his willingness to do unglamorous work without complaint. He deployed 6 times over 15 years. Trained with Allied Special Operations Forces. Developed curriculum for SEAL qualification training. Served as a liaison to Joint Special Operations Command. None of it was flashy, but all of it was necessary work that someone had to do competently. His most recent evaluation, written by a young commander who probably didn't know about Little Creek, said, "Senior Chief Brooks embodies quiet professionalism. He leads by example, mentors junior enlisted with patience and wisdom, and consistently places mission and team above personal recognition. He has earned the respect of every operator he's worked with through consistent character rather than charisma." I read that line 3 times. Consistent character rather than charisma. That was the opposite of who Evan had been 20 years ago. People can change. I believed that intellectually. But believing it and acting on it were different things. Was I obligated to help someone who'd hurt me just because they'd improved? Did fairness require me to ignore our history? Or was it perfectly reasonable to say no, not out of vindictiveness, but out of simple unwillingness to invest in someone who'd already taken so much? I called Lieutenant General Olivia Grant, now retired, but still someone whose judgment I trusted absolutely. "Liv, I need perspective on something." "I'm listening." I explained the situation. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Do you want to help him?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Part of me thinks he doesn't deserve my help. But another part wonders if I'm being petty. Let me ask you this. If he were anyone else, some SEAL you didn't know, with the same service record over the past 15 years, would you write the endorsement?" I considered that carefully. Probably yes. The record supports it. Then the question isn't whether he deserves your help in the abstract. It's whether your personal history should disqualify him from consideration you'd give anyone else. Should it? That's not for me to answer. But I'll say this. You've spent 15 years building a reputation for fairness and integrity. Whatever you decide, make sure it's consistent with who you've become, not who you were when he hurt you. After we hung up, I sat with that question. Who had I become? Not someone who held grudges. Not someone who punished people for past mistakes indefinitely. Not someone who let personal feelings override professional judgment. But also not someone who owed anyone, especially Evan Brooks, unlimited chances or unconditional support. The next morning, I made my decision. I drafted a letter. It took me 4 hours to get the tone right, honest but fair, acknowledging history while focusing on observable evidence. The letter read, "To whom it may concern, I am writing regarding the service waiver request for Senior Chief Petty Officer Evan Brooks, USN. I have known SCPO Brooks for 32 years, beginning when we were both military dependents and continuing through our respective military careers. I will be direct. SCPO Brooks and I have a complicated history. 15 years ago, he demonstrated significant professional disrespect toward me in a joint operational setting. That incident was documented and appropriately addressed by his chain of command at the time. I mention this not to relitigate past conflicts, but to establish context for what follows. Over the subsequent 15 years, I have observed SCPO Brooks' career from a distance through normal professional channels. His service record during this period demonstrates consistent professional growth, reliable leadership, and genuine commitment to mission accomplishment. His evaluations reflect someone who learned from his mistakes and chose to build his reputation through sustained competence rather than momentary performance. The question before the review board is not whether SCPO Brooks made mistakes earlier in his career. He did, and he faced appropriate consequences. The question is whether his subsequent 15 years of solid service merit consideration for continued service and advancement opportunity. Based solely on his documented performance since 2010, my professional assessment is that SCPO Brooks has demonstrated the sustained character and competence worthy of a service waiver. He has rebuilt his reputation through consistent action over a significant period. That work deserves recognition. This endorsement does not erase our history. It acknowledges that people can change, careers can be rebuilt, and 15 years of solid service should be evaluated on its own merits. Whether SCPO Brooks achieves the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer should be determined by his qualifications and the needs of the service, not by conflicts that occurred and were resolved 15 years ago. I provide this endorsement based on professional judgment, not personal friendship. We're not and will not be friends. But fairness requires that I evaluate his waiver request based on relevant evidence rather than personal grievance. Respectfully, Lieutenant General Rachel E. Henry, USAF Deputy Director, Defense Intelligence Agency. I read it one more time, then signed it and submitted it through official channels. I didn't tell Evan I'd written it. Didn't reach out to him. didn't expect or want acknowledgement. I'd done it because it was the right thing to do, not for him, but for my own integrity. 3 months later, I heard through Navy channels that his waiver had been approved. He'd been selected for Master Chief Petty Officer. He had 7 years to make it happen. Whether he did or not was no longer my concern. I never heard from him directly. No thank you, no attempt at contact. That was appropriate. We'd said everything that needed saying years ago. This wasn't about rebuilding a relationship. It was about me being the person I'd worked 15 years to become, someone who made decisions based on principle rather than pain. At a joint intelligence conference 6 months after I'd submitted the letter, a Navy SEAL commander approached me. "General Henry, I wanted to thank you." "For what, Commander?" "For the letter you wrote for Senior Chief Brooks. It made a difference. But more than that, it set a standard. You showed that fairness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean giving people credit for genuine change. That's been valuable for our community to see." I nodded acknowledgement. We all have to decide what kind of leaders we want to be. I chose fairness over grudges. That doesn't mean consequences disappear. It means they're proportional and finite. Yes, ma'am. That distinction matters. Years continued to pass. I remained at 3 stars, serving in the most senior intelligence and operational planning positions in the Defense Department. My legacy was being built through thousands of decisions, hundreds of operations, dozens of crises managed with competence and integrity. The Evan Brooks incident was barely a footnote in that larger narrative, mentioned occasionally in leadership discussions, but never defining. Evan made Master Chief Petty Officer in his 20th year of service. I saw the announcement in Navy personnel updates and felt nothing except mild acknowledgement. He'd achieved his goal. Good for him. It had nothing to do with me. 2 years after that, I received notification that he was retiring. 30 years of service. Full retirement ceremony at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. I was not invited. That was appropriate. Our lives had diverged completely, parallel tracks that no longer intersected in any meaningful way. But I received a letter sent through official channels to my Pentagon office about a week after his retirement ceremony. It was handwritten, brief, unexpectedly eloquent. "General Henry, I am writing to you on my last day in uniform. I learned recently that you wrote a letter supporting my service waiver 15 years ago. I never thanked you for that. I should have, and I'm sorry for that final failure of courtesy. You didn't owe me anything. After what I did, after how I treated you for years, you would have been justified in refusing. Many people told me I was presumptuous to even ask. But you wrote that letter anyway, and it changed my life. Not because it got me the waiver, though it did, but because it showed me what integrity actually looks like. You judged me on 15 years of evidence, not one terrible moment. You separated professional assessment from personal history. You gave me credit for change I'd actually earned rather than change I'd only claimed. That was a kind of fairness I didn't know how to give myself, let alone expect from someone I'd wronged. I want you to know that I retired as a better man than I was when you met me. Not because of any single moment, but because I spent 15 years trying to become someone who deserved the respect I'd once demanded as an entitlement. Your letter reminded me why that work mattered. We will never be friends again. I understand that, and I respect it. But I wanted you to know, before I left the service, that your fairness, your willingness to judge me on my merits rather than my mistakes, meant more to me than I can adequately express. Thank you for your service to our nation. Thank you for your integrity when dealing with me, both when I deserved consequences and when I deserved consideration. You are a better officer and a better person than I ever was, and the military is better for your leadership. With respect and gratitude, Evan Brooks, Master Chief Petty Officer, USN, Ret. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered in exactly the right way, as confirmation that I'd made the right choice 15 years ago when I chose fairness over resentment. That evening, I stood on my apartment balcony watching planes take off from Reagan National Airport, thinking about time and choices and the long arc of a military career. 37 years in uniform. 3 stars. A legacy built on thousands of decisions, most of them invisible to anyone except the people they affected directly. The Evan Brooks story wasn't really about him. It was about me, about who I'd chosen to be when someone hurt me, and who I'd chosen to be when that same person asked for help decades later. I'd chosen consequences when they were necessary. I'd chosen fairness when it was possible. I'd chosen to evaluate people on their full record rather than their worst moment. Not because they deserved unlimited grace, but because that's who I wanted to be. People show you who they are. Evan had shown me, clearly and repeatedly, until I'd finally believed him. But he'd also shown me, over 15 years of consistent service, that people can change if they do the work. Both things could be true. The key was knowing which truth mattered for which decision. The anger I'd carried for years was gone. The hurt had faded. What remained was quiet certainty that I'd handled an impossibly complicated situation with as much integrity as I could manage. That was enough. That was everything. 3 weeks later, I was nominated for my 4th star. Lieutenant General to General, 010, the highest rank in the U.S. military. Commander of Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, overseeing the entire intelligence apparatus for the Air Force. The nomination would require Senate confirmation, public scrutiny, comprehensive review of my entire career. My record would stand on its own merits. Every decision I'd made, every boundary I'd set, every moment of fairness and integrity, all of it would be examined. And I was confident in what they'd find. A career built on competence, consistency, and the courage to do what was right even when it cost something personally. Evan Brooks was barely a footnote in that story. A moment of conflict resolved with professionalism. A former relationship ended with clarity. A decision 15 years later to judge someone fairly despite personal history. All of it consistent with who I'd worked 4 decades to become. The Senate confirmation hearing took place on a cold morning in February. Senators asked about intelligence priorities, about emerging threats, about my vision for Air Force ISR in an era of great power competition. Not one question about an incident from 20 years ago with a Navy SEAL chief. Because in the scope of a 40-year career, it didn't matter enough to mention. I was confirmed unanimously. General Rachel Elizabeth Henry. For stars. One of only 2 women in the entire U.S. military at that rank. The 3rd African-American woman to achieve 010 in any service branch. At the promotion ceremony, surrounded by family and colleagues and senior military leadership, I thought about the 12-year-old girl who'd helped a lost kid with algebra homework. About the 2nd lieutenant who'd started with nothing except confidence and determination. About the colonel who'd had to make hard choices about boundaries and consequences. About the brigadier general who'd stood in a silent room while 5 other generals saluted her first. Every version of me had contributed to this moment. The helper, the professional, the boundary setter, the fair evaluator. All of it had mattered. All of it had built towards something larger than any single relationship or conflict. Respect must be mutual or it's worthless. I'd learned that from Evan Brooks. But I'd also learned something else, something that took longer to understand. Fairness doesn't require friendship. Justice doesn't require vindictiveness. You can hold people accountable for their mistakes and still judge them fairly when they've genuinely changed. That was the legacy I wanted to leave. Not as the general who'd been disrespected once and never forgave, but as the leader who demanded respect, enforced boundaries when necessary, and evaluated people fairly based on their full record when the time came. 40 years in uniform. For stars. A career defined not by a single moment of conflict, but by thousands of moments of choosing integrity over convenience, fairness over resentment, principle over personal grievance. That was enough. That was everything. And somewhere, retired now and building whatever life came next, Evan Brooks was trying to do the same. We'd never speak again. Our paths would never cross. But we'd both learned, in our own ways and at our own cost, what it meant to become someone worthy of the respect we'd once taken for granted. That was the real ending. Not dramatic or satisfying in any movie sense. Just 2 people who'd once mattered to each other, who'd hurt and helped and failed and grown, moving forward in separate directions with whatever wisdom they'd managed to earn along the way. The military moved on. The missions continued. And I kept serving, kept leading, kept showing up with the same integrity that had carried me from 2nd lieutenant to general. Because that's what leaders do. We show up. We do the work. We make the hard calls. And we build legacies through consistent character, not momentary performance. 15 years after the silence, 35 years after the friendship began, 40 years into a career that had demanded everything and given back meaning, I finally understood what mattered. Not who'd hurt me, not who'd helped me, not vindication or redemption or any single moment of truth. Just the accumulated weight of 10,000 choices to be fair, to be competent, to be someone whose word meant something and whose judgment could be trusted. That was the real victory. That was what 4 stars represented. That was enough. That's how it all unfolded. Years of service, years of silence, and one moment that revealed the truth about respect, boundaries, and character. If you've ever had someone underestimate you, only to realize later they were wrong, tell me your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Before you go, let me know, have you ever outgrown someone who once mattered to you? Have you ever had to set a boundary that changed everything? Do you think people truly change, or do they just learn to act better? If you connected with this journey, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More true stories about resilience, leadership, and reclaiming your worth are coming soon.